Democratic whip.
Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S4240 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
S4240, a bill to amend Section 2441 of Title 18, United States Code to broaden the scope of individuals subject to prosecution for war crimes.
Without objection, the amendment is discharged, and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Durbin substitute amendment be agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I will come to the floor later this morning or early this afternoon to discuss this bill, which Senator Graham joined me in co-sponsoring, to say that the United States should never be a safe haven for war criminals, regardless of where they committed their crimes. I'll speak to that at a later moment. At this point, I'd ask permission to give a statement that it be placed in a separate part of the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, early in my political career, I learned an important lesson. If you want to succeed, you don't go it alone. For every major decision, you need a trusted friend to turn to, someone who will be honest with you and steer you in the right direction. In my life, I've been lucky to have many friends who passed that test, including my mentors. Paul Douglas, a United States Senator from Illinois, who introduced me to this world when I was a college senior, and my predecessor in the United States Senate, Paul Simon. Another Illinois legend who joins that rank is Gene Callahan. Paul Simon and Gene Callahan were two of the hardest working and most grounded people I've ever known. They were public servants in every sense of the word. And the two of them pioneered an approach to politics I try to live up to. Return every phone call. Respond to every constituent. Always, always, always remain true to your values. Sadly, both Paul Simon and Gene Callahan have been gone for many years, but their legacy lives on in a public servant who has perfected their model for leadership. That public servant's name is Congresswoman Cheri Bustos. For the past 10 years, she has represented Northwest and Central Illinois in the House, and she happens to be Gene Callahan's daughter. Since Cheri was first elected in 2012, she's lived, breathed, and fought for every family in the 17th District. From providing the best constituent service in the House to securing more funding for her district than any other Democrat in the House, Cheri quickly set herself apart as one of the bright leaders in our state's history. She'll be retiring at the end of this Congress, but before she heads home, I want to take a moment to share how proud I've been to watch our MVP from East Moline emerge as an all-star champion in Congress. Cheri grew up in a family that stressed the importance of public service. Her grandfather, Joe Callahan, was a hog farmer and a New Deal Democrat who represented one of Illinois' most rural counties in the state General Assembly. He instilled in Cheri a deep appreciation for rural America and the family farms that feed our nation. Whenever the state legislature was in session, Grandfather Joe would stay with Cheri, Gene, and the rest of the family in Springfield. It was during that same period that I first met Gene Callahan. The two of us were working for then Lieutenant Governor Paul Simon. Gene would invite me, Paul, and sometimes even Senator Alan Dixon over to the House for a spirited conversation about the news of the day. It was truly a kitchen cabinet. And oftentimes when we sat at the dinner table dishing out politics, we were joined by another youngster, a participant, a young Cheri Callahan, was around listening carefully. It was where she learned her first lesson in politics. But growing up, Cheri was passionate about a lot more than politics. In high school, she was a force to be reckoned with on the basketball court. Just as importantly, she understood the value of being a team player. So much so that in college, she was picked as the MVP on both her basketball and volleyball teams. That's a quality that really defines Cheri Bustos. From the basketball court to the floor of the House, she is a team player who is in it to win it, not just for herself, but more importantly for the people who are counting on her. Throughout her life, Cheri's passion for victory has been surpassed only by her capacity for empathy. She always listens, It's another lesson she learned from her dad, Gene, and her mom, Ann, and Paul Simon, all of whom, like Cheri, had something to do with public service, either by participating in journalism, public service, or supporting those who do. In Cheri's case, she was a reporter with the Quad City Times for 17 years. She started on the night shift as a police reporter. It's a tough job and it doesn't pay a lot, but Cheri struck gold. While working for the Quad City Times, she met a young sheriff named Cheri Bustos. And all these years later, they're happily married with 3 children and 2 grandkids. Cheri won her first election in 2007 for a seat on the East Moline City Council. I know that she won it because I knocked on doors for her. A few years later, she called me and said, "I'm moving on up. I want to run for Congress." I'll admit, my wife and I were surprised. Making the leap from city council to Congress is not for the faint of heart, but Cheri was an obvious natural. That first congressional campaign began in her kitchen with one staffer, her nephew Brad. The 2 of them traveled all over the Northwest and Central Illinois in his car, which had no working air conditioner and was pretty much held together by duct tape. But like Gene had taught her, Cheri showed up to every event, every town hall, every fundraiser, every phone bank. It was a heartfelt campaign that started off on a shoestring. And that November, Cheri won that tough district by 8 points. A couple of months after her victory, Cheri and Jerry made their nearly 15-hour drive to Washington with a U-Haul hitched to their Jeep Wrangler. It was the beginning of an amazing congressional career. During the first time, Cheri launched a Cheri on Shift, her practice of working alongside constituents at their jobs. In Cheri's words, the Cheri on Shift experiment gave her, quote, a feel for what people do for a living, how they support their families, their struggles, and why they take pride in their jobs. And over the past decade, Cheri has served drinks at the Golden Hen Cafe in Galena, planted soybeans with a farmer in Galesburg, and taken care of senior citizens at the Lifescape facility in Rockford. She's done everything from cleaning an ice rink with a Zamboni machine to trying her hand at beekeeping. And with every Cheri on Shift, she would ask her constituents, "What do you need from me in Washington?" Just ask her staff. The answers to those questions made all the difference in Cheri's office. Consider the case of a nurse in Galesburg who told Cheri she was so concerned about the lead pipes in her home that she was planning on dropping out of nursing school to cover the cost of replacing them. Cheri told her, "We're going to do this right." And soon she learned it just wasn't one nurse who was suffering from lead pipes, but the entire community. So Cheri kept her promise to that nurse. She found the federal and state dollars to make things right in Galesburg. And if you want to see the difference that can be made, look at what Cheri has done for the Rock Island Arsenal. When I entered the Senate, the Rock Island Arsenal was on its last leg. Sorry to say there were people in the Pentagon determined to close it. I was not going to let that happen, but I needed the right partner, and that partner was Cheri. Today, Rock Island Arsenal's future is bright. We have worked together to secure, with Tammy Duckworth, hundreds of millions of dollars in funding and projects to upgrade that facility. In fact, the Rock Island Arsenal will soon be home to the largest 3D printer in the world, which will build lighter, cheaper, safer frames for military combat vehicles. It's one of the many ways that Cheri has helped position Illinois to lead in the future in manufacturing, with union workers at the helm. Justice and opportunity for all. That has been Cheri's passion since she was a little girl that I first saw at the Callahan dinner table. And it's the passion that has defined her years in public service and her decade in Congress. One of her final acts in Congress is one that will have impact across America for decades to come. She passed a law to end forced arbitration for sexual assault survivors. After she steered that bill through the House, I had the honor of working on it successfully as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. This law will ensure that every survivor can have their day in court, and it wouldn't have happened without Cheri Bustos. Though it saddens me that Cheri's leaving at the end of this term, it's worth noting that in returning home, she's remaining true to those who sent her here. You see, Cheri is a strong believer in stepping out of your comfort zone. She says it's, quote, where the magic happens. And it's a theme throughout her career. Every 10 years ago, Cheri switches gears from journalism to healthcare to city council to Congress, and now I don't know what the next step will be. I think I speak for every resident in Illinois' 17th District in saying, Cheri, we can't wait to see what you achieve next. My wife Loretta and I are amazed, but not one bit surprised to see how far you've come. You see, we've trusted you for a long time when you are our babysitter for our kids, a graduate of Illinois Women Institute for Leadership, the I Will Training Academy, to one of the most accomplished legislators and constituent advocates in the House of Representatives. Somewhere out there, both Jean and Ann Callahan are beaming with pride with what their daughter has achieved. I want to wish a wonderful holiday season to Cheri, her husband Jerry, her sister Lynn, her husband Al, their 3 kids, Tony, Nick, and Joey, and your daughter-in-laws as well as your grandkids. Now that you're retiring, I'm sure you'll have plenty of time for dancing to Stevie Wonder under the Christmas tree. Mr. President, I ask that the statement I'm about to submit be placed in the record in a separate spot
Without
after that
objection.
last statement. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.